Now to our special report tonight with major implications for where impeachment is headed. We begin with a fact of life for presidents under investigation, be it congressional or criminal investigation. There's major pressure on their most trusted and senior aides to testify. That puts the aides in a tough spot between their obligation to cooperate, their obligation to their boss, and the legitimate limits on what they say. President Clinton's advisors faced that pressure during the Whitewater probe. From his spokesman and confidant, George Stephanopoulos, remember when he was doing politics, to key counsel Bruce Lindsay, to Sidney Blumenthal, a loyal Clinton advisor who cooperated with the grand jury in testimony that later became public. He famously told jurors that he asked President Clinton, "What have you done wrong?" And the president replied, "Nothing." And then after cooperating, Blumenthal faced the cameras dramatically on the courthouse steps and criticized Ken Starr for hauling him before a grand jury under those circumstances.
I never imagined that in America I would be hauled before a federal grand jury to answer questions. If they think they have intimidated me, they have failed.
Now, there are many examples of aides walking this line throughout history, and not just in the often cited impeachment examples of Clinton or Nixon. President George W. Bush faced an investigation with some parallels to today's Ukraine scandal, and that the president has major foreign policy powers, but that's what makes their potential abuse so significant. These can be matters of life and death. Bush aides found themselves interrogated by the Mueller of their era, Patrick Fitzgerald, about alleged abuse of powers. Those same foreign policy powers, outing a CIA operative for allegedly political purposes. Think about that. Abusing national security powers for politics. That's a crime. And soon some of Bush's most trusted aides were under a microscope, testifying like Karl Rove and Alberto Gonzales, or indicted and convicted like Scooter Libby. In a related...
For the Attorney General, Alberto Gonzales told a congressional panel he made mistakes and insisted politics was not a factor in the firing of 8 federal prosecutors.
That was the time when Mr. Gonzales was testifying to Congress about their investigation. He ultimately was ousted over some of those issues. Now, there were those battles then, President Bush claiming executive privilege and trying to prevent Rove and others from facing Congress. Why am I telling you all this right now? Well, there is context for this pickle that Mick Mulvaney is in tonight, right now, as his team goes to court arguing about whether he can testify against Trump. And there could be legitimate limits on testimony. Classified material, privileges that do apply. And now on the list of current Trump aides, Mulvaney is number 1, not only in the org chart, but also in allegedly overseeing the Ukraine bribery plot, including his famous televised confession.
Did he also mention to me in the past the corruption related to the DNC server? Absolutely. No question about that.
But to be clear, what you just described is a quid pro quo.
We do that all the time with foreign policy. That's it. And that's why we held up the money.
That's it. So emphatic. But that was not it, as we reported in a breakdown on The Beat. Mulvaney's press conference made him appear among the witnesses stating there was bribery. There he is. Only to move back as he tried to retract his own televised confession. So Mulvaney has done a lot to make himself an even more sought-after witness and to impeach his own credibility, so to speak. Whatever one thinks of Mulvaney, and he does look a little guilty because he confessed and then took it back, in fairness, his situation does reflect a tension other aides have faced when pressed to testify. And that's the context for one of the strangest turns in impeachment right now. Call it Mulvaney versus Trump. Mulvaney trying to join a lawsuit against his boss, Trump. Mulvaney's team is in court tonight with a move that makes fitting headlines for a year where it seems like everything has already happened. But not this. He is trying to join this lawsuit against Trump that basically asks the court to decide if Mulvaney should testify against his boss. Now, that is unusual. Mulvaney could just fight this request outright, arguing executive privilege, or if he thinks the truth is good for him and Trump, he could just go down and testify, right? He's already made this whole argument on live TV. He could make it again to Congress, or he could adjust it. But instead, he is now trying to join the lawsuit against Trump with an ousted Trump aide, Charles Kupperman, who was a former deputy to John Bolton. And Bolton's key here because he has all kinds of bad things reportedly to say about the bribery plot. He even reportedly said he wanted no part of a, quote, drug deal that Sondland and Mulvaney are cooking up. So Mulvaney is trying to join forces with the person who accuses him of cooking up a drug deal, John Bolton. who is flabbergasted at the move. The Washington Post reporting the whole thing highlights these internal divisions in Trump land. The implication here is that Bolton's deputy is making a genuine request for a judge to give the green light to talk, while Mulvaney is jumping in to muddy the waters and maybe seize on the ruling if he gets support for the Trump position opposing talking. The strategy here is basically this wouldn't cost Mulvaney much. If he gets a ruling forcing him to talk, he could just go back to trying to defy these other requests like other Trump officials have. That's the gambit. But before we bring in our experts, look at the substance here. Bolton's deputy is making a serious argument that, like other aides before him, he's now caught between the competing demand of Trump and Congress. And in a nod towards the significance of the Democrats' impeachment probe, Bolton's deputy says if he chooses wrong or if he clams up too fast, he could inflict grave constitutional injury on the House impeachment probe. And finally, this brief cites some precedent that Trump and presumably Mr. Bolton may be concerned about, that Congress has more power to force testimony when probing, quote, misconduct by impeachable officials. Impeachable officials. The president's the most important impeachable official there is. So while these White House officials do follow a long line of aides who've wrestled with these dilemmas, and some of them are real, rarely do you ever see a chief of staff join a suit against his own boss, the president, or do what Mulvaney's doing right now this evening, asking a court to tell him whether to reject his own president's order or make common cause with other officials who've accused him of a bribery plot that may be impeachable, let alone an official who reportedly accused him of cooking up a drug deal. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.